Hey, what's up you guys? I am Missy Renee, and in today's video we're going to talk about how to manifest the very best version of you for 2021 and beyond. So if manifestation and conscious creation are topics that you are interested in learning more about, then definitely don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so that way you are notified every time I put out new content every week. If you're interested in talking to me about your specific issue, I'll leave the link below to one-on-one coaching, so definitely be sure to check that out. And with it being the new year, I figured it would be the perfect time to talk about how to manifest whatever it is that you desire, because this is already a time of year where we are already excited for change. This time of year typically is when we want to look forward to good things to come. We want to leave the things that no longer serve us and overall just get ourselves into a better place. That said, I want to make sure that we don't fall into the same habits that we typically fall into this time of year, where we make resolutions and then for the first couple of weeks or even couple months, we may really get into it, but then ultimately we slide back into what we've always done. We may slip up and then just say, screw it, I'll try again next year. And I noticed that this is a really similar pattern to what happens to a lot of people when they're new to manifesting. A lot of times when we're new and we find out about these teachings, we may start to implement the techniques, we may get into it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but if we don't start seeing progress in a way that we might expect to see progress, or if we're not seeing anything that's showing us the results that we want, we might fall off the bandwagon entirely. So we're going to talk about how to make sure that this does not happen to you this year and really focus on how we can go about changing any habits that do not serve us so that we can finally manifest whatever it is that we desire. Really quick before we dive into this video, I just have a quick announcement about my upcoming workshop, January 9th, on how to manifest wealth and abundance. This is going to be a deep dive in everything that you need to know in order to bring more prosperity, more wealth, and more financial freedom into your life. I will leave the link down below to sign up. So if this is something that you are trying to do this year, if you want to kick off the new year with all the tools to manifest more abundance, definitely make sure you sign up, and I will see you there next Saturday. So the new year is a time where we are especially motivated to change ourselves for the better. So I figured this would be a great time to get this video out and kind of strike while the iron's hot and while you've got that momentum going. Because we need to talk about habits. We are creatures of habit. And when we are new to something, it's gonna take some conscious effort for a consistent period of time before we're gonna really start to notice the change and before it becomes a habit itself. Because the most frequent cause of people quitting conscious creation or trying to manifest is that they don't persist with their new habit. They don't persist with using their imagination and imagining living that end, living in that wish fulfilled. So to make sure that we persist in manifesting the life that we want, we need to understand what habits are, how they affect us, and what we can do to break them, change them, and make it so that manifestation becomes a lifestyle, that manifestation becomes a habit in its own. Because these habits run our entire lives. And a habit is just something that you have done with repetition so much that it just becomes automatic. Whether it's an action or a thought process, it's basically just something that we have done over and over and over again to the point where we don't even have to think about it and we just do it automatically. 95% of our waking hours, we're running on autopilot. Moreover, about 40 to 50% of our behaviors are habitual. So this is taking up a big chunk of our life. And again, we're not usually even consciously aware of the things that we're doing. If we're spending 95% of our day on autopilot and half of the behaviors that we're doing are habitual, then naturally something like manifestation is going to be something that we really, really need to put the conscious effort into first. When we are so used to operating a certain way and just doing things on autopilot, then anytime something new is introduced to us, it seems really challenging and it seems really hard. And after all, manifestation requires you to completely change your way of thinking than what you have grown up knowing and believing to be true. So naturally, this is where the roadblocks come in. And this is similar to why so many of us fail when we make our New Year's resolutions, because we are creatures of habit and we don't like change. And even Neville spoke about this extensively. He brought up man's habit and man's habitual patterns all the time. And I'm going to give you a passage from Neville to kind of illustrate the point. When man discovers that his world is his own mental activity made visible, that no man can come unto him except he draws him, and that there is no one to change but himself, his own imaginative self, his first impulse is to reshape the world in the image of his ideal. But his ideal is not so easily incarnated. In that moment, when he ceases to conform to his external discipline, he must impose upon himself a far more rigorous discipline, the self-discipline upon which the realization of his ideal depends. Imagination is not entirely untrammeled and free to move at will without any rules to constrain it. In fact, the contrary is true. Imagination travels according to habit. Imagination has choice, but it chooses according to habit. Awake or asleep, man's imagination is constrained to follow certain definite patterns. It is this benumbing influence of habit that man must change. If he does not, his dreams will fade under the paralysis of custom. To realize his ideal, man must first change the pattern which his imagination has followed. Habitual thought is indicative of character. So even Neville saw that man's biggest challenge when it comes to conscious creation is the self-discipline and that rigorous focus of your imagination, and making sure that your imagination follows and matches that ideal version of you that you desire to be. So in order to overcome this, we need to understand how habits are formed so we can learn how to break them and make new habits. So in psychology, there is what's called a habit loop. Basically, it means that there are 3 patterns that sets off our habitual acts. Whether it's a thought, whether it's an action, 3 things happen when a habit is getting played out. The first part of the habit loop is the cue or the trigger. Secondly is the routine. And third is the reward. So the cue or the trigger is the thing that sets the habit off. That's the thing where once you notice it, your conscious mind, your decision-making mind shuts off and you start to go into that habit. You start to go into that unconscious pattern. And a cue can be anything. It could be an object, it could be a person, it could be a place, but it's typically anything that is going to set us off in a certain motion. So when it comes to manifesting, the cue here is usually always something happening in our 3D world, something that goes against what we desire to manifest. In this context, the cue or the trigger is going to be the thing that you see or notice in your 3D world that is opposite of what you want to manifest. So for example, it can be that when you're trying to manifest a specific person and you're trying to imagine getting a text message from them and then they don't text you, that becomes a cue. That triggers the habit process. In this example, the routine would be to react negatively. You get that trigger, which is not seeing your desire, and then the routine is for you to react, to have that burst of thoughts of, I know he doesn't really like me, I know she is off with somebody else, I know that I'm just being a fool for all of this. Things like that. Once you are triggered or once that cue sets in, you then go into that routine, which is usually in this context, in this scenario, the train of negative reactions and negative thoughts. The reward, ironically, is not a reward at all in this context, but it's what happens following your routine. So you got triggered, you had a negative reaction, and then what happens after the routine is a feeling of frustration, a feeling that you screwed up, worry that now you just made it worse, or the feeling that you just want to give up entirely. So we need to be mindful of this process when we are new to manifesting. And this is a very common type of habit loop when we are new to this. We're triggered when we see the opposite of what we desire. We follow the routine, which is a negative reaction, and then the reward, which is not even so much a reward in this case, is that feeling of, I screwed up, this isn't working, I should just give up entirely. Whatever the case may be for you specifically, know that these habit loops can be broken. And there are things that you can do to make it so it is easier for you to get rid of those types of habits, get rid of those types of reactions, and form new habits that are going to make it so you have an easier time getting into this process. The first thing that we're going to want to do to break this habit is to change that cue or that trigger. Because if you can change certain situational cues, as in avoiding certain places, maybe places that you and your SP always went to, certain circumstances or certain things, whatever is going to set you off when it comes to what you're trying to manifest. If there is something that you know is going to be a trigger for you, then you need to change it. You need to avoid it. If you can avoid that cue or that trigger, you're going to avoid that habitual loop from happening in the first place. So say, for example, if you are one to stalk your SP on social media, which don't be ashamed if you do, it's common for a lot of us. If this is something that you do though, this is a heavy, heavy trigger for a lot of people. And this is going to more often than not set off that reaction. You're going to have that trigger, you're going to have that negative reaction, and then it's going to make you feel even worse. So avoiding social media, and especially avoiding your SP's social media page while you are trying to break this cue and change this trigger, is going to be the best thing that you could possibly do. Anything that is going to set you off, you want to try to avoid it in this stage. Changing the cue and changing the trigger is going to help keep you from setting off that negative habitual loop. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is find those cues and find those triggers and do everything that you can to avoid them. The next time that you notice a negative reaction happen, ask yourself, what was the thing that set me off? And whatever that thing was, do everything in your power to avoid it, at least for the time being, until you have built up a new, more strong and sustaining habit. If you find that you cannot avoid certain cues, or when you find that something has triggered you, the other thing that you need to do in order to break a habit is to change the routine or change the reaction to something. And by the way, these are things that I did personally that helped tremendously get me out of these old habits and get me out of the negative loops that I was stuck in. But if you are triggered by something, if a cue comes up and you feel it coming on, you know that that thing is going to set off a reaction, note it as soon as you can and just close your eyes on the spot right then and there and just start taking some deep breaths and put all of your focus on just breathing. Put all of your focus and concentration on the breath, on just taking some nice deep breaths. Because this conscious effort of diverting your attention away from that trigger response, you're breaking that habit loop. You're stopping the negative reaction before it starts to really step in and snowball, and before it begins an avalanche. After you disrupt the routine or stop yourself from that reaction, you want to use this time to implement a new reaction. And this is how you begin to change your habits. This is how you enforce a new way of doing things. And you do that by changing your perspective. After you have taken some breaths and you have shifted your focus and made that conscious effort to place the focus on something else, you're no longer on autopilot. You're now consciously aware of what's happening and what's going on. So use this moment to start changing that perspective and implementing the new habit and the change that you would ultimately like to experience. So an example of this could be in that moment when you're catching yourself, you're placing your focus on that breath, tell yourself that, yeah, I know that this was my old pattern. Acknowledge it. Say it to yourself in your mind. I know that the old me would have responded negatively to the situation. I know that my old habits and my old patterns would have snowballed at this point by this time. Because this thing triggered me and I was able to stop it, I'm now having an easier and easier time shifting my focus away from the thing that I don't want. And I am now creating new habits because I am a conscious creator and I am the God of my reality. I know that wherever I keep my focus and whatever I keep my perception on is what's going to be my reality. And really start to drill that in at this time. Really start to tell yourself in these moments, after these cues and after these triggers, when you're able to cut yourself off from the routine, when you can stop and halt that negative reaction, every time you're able to consciously do that, it becomes easier and easier. And this is how you can turn what would have been a negative reaction and flip it into something positive. So starting the new year off on the right foot, I want to give you guys a 30-day challenge. Try to break these habit loops. Try to avoid these triggers or these cues, or try to disrupt the routine before you start to spiral. If you can get in the habit of doing this, you're going to find that everything else starts to come together naturally. And again, more than anything else, don't forget to persist. It can take some time for something to become habitual, and conscious creation is no exception. This is something that is new to all of us. None of us grew up knowing how to do this. So always be sure to persist and keep going. If you are able to overcome the initial setbacks, if you're able to get into the frequent habit of doing this, then before you know it, it's going to become a natural lifestyle to you. And then conscious creation is just going to be a natural way of life. So put this to the test. I challenge you for the next 30 days to do this, as well as imagining in the state akin to sleep and persisting in that wish fulfilled. And let me know in the comments below how everything goes for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in checking out any of my other resources, I will leave the links below to one-on-one coaching, my blog, and my social links. So definitely be sure to check them out. And don't forget to check out these videos over here. Each video is a different topic, but all go into how to manifest the very best life possible. So until we meet again, you guys, take care, be well, and never forget that you can break these habits and you can form the habits that will help you to create the life that you have always wanted. Happy manifesting.